started. So a little bit about me to begin. I have 10 years of federal service. I began on a government project in the Nevada desert. So if you know anything about nuclear waste, I worked on the Yucca Mountain project prior to moving to DC to work at DHS. And I had the amazing opportunity to lead education efforts under Secretary Napolitano, who is just this amazing person. If you ever heard her speak about education or spoke at a college, those are words I put in her mouth. And the amazing thing was she never questioned anything I put in her hands. I also, when she retired, she tried to figure out where her key people were all going to go. So she moved me over to FEMA, where I led employee development. So you can find out a lot more about me. I have done everything from managing rock bands to working on Saturday Night Live, retail, ran radio stations. So you can find a little bit more about me at my personal website. So let's talk about our plan for tonight. First of all, I want this to be interactive. So I want you to feel free to put things in the chat. Kelly, if you think it's appropriate, I am fine if we open up the mics and let folks ask questions. That does not bother me. I'm happy to do that. We're going to have a couple of quick polls. So if you see, you should have the opportunity, if you look at the more button, or somewhere you should see reactions where you can react to something. It might be at the end of the participants where you can raise your hand. There's a yes, no button. So we're going to go through a couple of things that we are going to ask to do a poll, because I want to see what you think, and hopefully we can debunk a couple of myths. Also, plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So in 2009, I moved to DC to take a senior staff role at the US Department of Homeland Security. And I was sitting by a pool with a bunch of my friends. There may have been cocktails involved. And we were sitting, and my friends were talking to me about my role at Homeland Security and what I thought. And my prediction in 2009, they asked me, you know, what terrorist group are you afraid of? And I said to them, I'm not afraid of ISIS or Al-Qaeda. What scares me to death is the guy who's pissed off with a gun. And as you flash forward to today, what we're going to be talking about are those pissed off people with either guns or pressure cooker bombs or whatever. My focus tonight is going to be on domestic lone wolf terrorists. Now, we know there are plenty of them out there, but if you have ever seen the movie Traitor, that's what leads me to believe that, you know, that's what's going to happen. So that was my prediction in 2009. So let's talk a little bit about the Las Vegas shooting. I actually lived in Las Vegas and managed radio stations. I did a lot of work with Live Nation. This is on the end of the Strip. If you've ever been to Vegas, Mandalay Bay is the nicest smelling place in Las Vegas. It was October 1st, 2017. It was the third or fourth year of the Route 91 Harvest Festival. And it happens in a little, what they call the Las Vegas Village. It's an empty lot across from Mandalay Bay, which is my favorite place. The Laughing Jackalope is right there. And it's about 15 acres, and it's right there at the end of the Strip. It was about 10 o'clock at night, 10:05, and Jason Aldean was on stage finishing his set. And that's when that's when the shots rang out. Now, bear in mind, if you've ever seen the Las Vegas Strip, it's 4 lanes in either direction. So this is 8 lanes across from Mandalay Bay. It's not like it's in the parking lot. It was pretty far. And Stephen Paddock actually had to negotiate around that stage because it was blocking partial of this view. When the shooting started, a lot of folks thought it was just fireworks. So let's talk a little bit about what he did. Paddock had checked in Mandalay Bay on the 25th of September. Now, he actually lived about 80 miles away. So, you would think, why is he staying on the Strip? Well, because he was so familiar face to all of the MGM and Caesars casinos in the Strip because he was a gambler. So it was very common for him to stay in a hotel. He checked in on the 25th. A couple days later, he got a second room, a suite. And, again, very common because he's there all the time. He's a high-rated player. When he checked in over those 2 days, because he actually checked in the second room, between the 2 days, he had brought in 5 suitcases. And the bellhop helped him get the suitcases upstairs. And those suitcases were full of guns and ammo. He was so meticulous that he placed a baby monitor outside his room on a cart, when they bring up your food and there's a cart, and he put the cart right outside with baby monitor so he could see and hear everything that was going on in the hallway. Then he screwed the hotel door shut with a drill and some screws. He knocked out the windows of his hotel room with a hammer, 2 of the windows. He had actually considered other venues. He looked in the Boston area, Great Woods. I don't know what it's called right now. It might be the Xfinity Pavilion. He looked in Chicago. He looked in Vegas. But this, he felt, would get him the biggest impact. 58 people died that night and 867 were injured. It was the most lethal gun death toll in our country. So who was Stephen Paddock? An average 67-year-old guy. He had been an auditor in his career, actually was an auditor for the IRS. He was a real estate businessman. He made his retirement living managing apartment buildings for several other people. And he, like I said, he lived about 80 miles away. He was a huge gambler. He had a pool of $1.4 million sitting in a bank, and that's what he used. And he felt gambling was better than playing the lottery or investing in stocks because he had amassed that $1.4 million doing that. He lived out of hotels. So as I said, it was common for him to check in. What was interesting was his family had said he never had drawn a gun except when he went hunting. So his family was literally shocked when this happened. He had no criminal record. What's interesting about Paddock is his father was a bank robber on the FBI list. So what did his family see? What did people see? When they interviewed folks, they found somebody who had seated next to him at a restaurant at Mandalay Bay, and he was ranting about gun control. It was a huge problem. When the cleaning people went in his room, they felt uncomfortable because he was hyper-focused on them. He would stare at them, and it was really uncomfortable. He had voiced over recent days how angry he was at what happened at Waco and Ruby Ridge. And didn't we hear that when we saw Timothy McVeigh? That was one of his issues. And the biggest thing was, and he had heard to say this several times, that after Hurricane Katrina, FEMA set up those camps because that was what the government was going to do. They were going to disarm everyone, take our houses away, and throw us into these camps. He was very disillusioned with the federal government. This is actually something he said. He felt that we had to arm ourselves as American citizens. Now, I don't know if anybody here is living in Florida. My nephew lives in Florida, and he owns a gun, and he was trading in one gun for a new gun. And usually when he buys a gun, it's about a 20-minute process because he has his license already, his permit. Well, last week when he went in, it was 17 hours. So yes, Americans are arming themselves. Stephen Paddock felt he was the one to make the sacrifice, that he had to do it to show how important it was for us to have guns. Let's look at another example. If anyone knows me, if any of my students are here, I actually am from the Boston area. 2013 was the first year I was not at the finish line. So the Boston Marathon bombing starts in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, and it runs through 16 different communities and ends in Boston on Boylston Street. What's interesting about this is it's a federal holiday in the state of Massachusetts. It's Patriots Day. So if anybody's seen the movie Patriots Day, that's why they call it Patriots Day. There's a couple of other things going on in Boston that day. It's opening day at Fenway Park, and Fenway is less than a mile from the finish line. So you have about 27,000 runners. They go into Boston Common, they're bussed out to Hopkinton. Everything in the finish line area is closed. The race is actually a late morning race. It starts at 10 a.m. because of the difficulty getting everybody out to Hopkinton. You have your elite runners crossing the finish line in about 2.25 hours. At the same time, Fenway Park starts emptying out and the streets are packed. You can't move in downtown Boston. So here is our finish line. You can see the yellow mark in the middle of your screen is the finish line. The first explosion was right there. The second one was down the street about a block. The first explosion happened at about 2:45 in the afternoon. The second one was 10 seconds later. Chaos ensued. Now, the video I'm about to play for you is given to me courtesy of Boston EMS. And if you have any interest in emergency management, I think you'll find this video very interesting. What they have done in this video is taken live footage from the finish line and overlaid Boston EMS communications. So I want you to listen carefully to the video.
The reason for that is what is that for this marijuana? The lion's still, and that's the only way I want to do it. What was that? 8:33, something just exploded at the finish line. Two separate devices. All units being advised, worry about search devices.
UCC, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, see it? Confirmative. Two devices just went off at Boylston and Exeter. All units, extreme caution.
All units be advised, the explosive device. Everyone use caution, please.
Tactical. Let's that, please. Logistics. We just got an explosive device go off by the Copley Library. Please have all the units hold their positions till called. We make an evaluation. All right, affirm that, please.
All units hold your positions. All units hold your positions until we got confirmation on the injuries. All units hold your positions.
Loading officer, all crews return to their vehicle at the Alpha station.
Return to your vehicles, please, everybody.
Zone 1, call it tactical.
Zone 1, go.
Prepare to receive patients at the Alpha tent.
Okay.
Alpha 10 has a message receiving patients.
Alpha team has the message, receiving patients.
Tactical. IC.
IC, go.
Okay, Dr. IC, we don't have a count yet on casualties. Well, we are receiving casualties coming in. They're initially being directed downstream towards Alpha. Would you notify all the hospitals that there's potential here for a mass casualty event? Everyone's looking for Dr. Q. Tango 2. Exeter and Boylston. I got 3 people down. Heavy trauma. Exeter and Boylston intersection.
Exeter and Boylston, heavy trauma. Exeter and Boylston. Do I have any units nearby?
Paramedic 40. Paramedic 40 in Boylston. We're arriving now.
Okay, P40. Okay, Tango 1 on scene. I need another BLS unit to Exeter and Boylston.
You'll start that way.
830, you'll start that way.
30.
30?
That's very nice.
Unit with a 1 at the end, go. Zone 1.
Tactical, I have multiple casualties on Boylston. 673 between Exeter and Dartmouth.
673 Boylston, multiple. 673 multiple casualties.
One after the other.
Vision 3, show me heading that way.
Closest we've had an attack.
X-ray 3?
30, we're heading that way.
30, okay. Division supervisor did not read that.
Division 3, Alpha 2, heading that way.
Division 3, I don't know. PC, go.
We need triage tanks brought up to the scene. We probably have at least, I'd say, 40 patients.
I see, I have it. 40 patients at least. 40 patients at least. We need a triage tent brought over to the. I see key location of the triage tent again.
Division 4.
Div 4.
I've got one down at Newbury in Exeter, right in front of Joe's American Bar and Grill.
In front of the American Bar and Grill on Newbury. Is there an extra unit?
X-ray 9 and 10, where is it?
In front of the Bar and Grill, American Bar and Grill on Newbury.
Show it through.
Okay.
Hotel 2.
Hotel 2.
I don't want to some comment.
Last unit did not.
That is, for me, sometimes hard to watch because I knew so many of those folks and I should have been right there. I should have been one of those workers at the Boston Marathon bombing, if not for my nephew's first birthday. The situation started changing. Within 22 minutes, Boston EMS had cleared all spectators, and about 4 minutes later, they had cleared all patients and transported them to 24 area hospitals. By 4:06 p.m., the bomb went off, remember, at little after, close to 3 o'clock. Everybody had been transported. There were reports of other bombs. Folks believed they were finding backpacks everywhere, and they had to treat them as an unknown because they were just abandoned. And it was a lot of folks that had just left their bags. There was, the top photo shows an explosion at the John F. Kennedy Library in the Boston area. Initial reports just knew that it was an explosion. The news, once they got more information, found out that it was a transformer. But there were thousands of people waiting to cross the finish line. Their families were trying to find them, and there was nowhere they could go. That day, we lost Martin Richard, a young 8-year-old boy, and Lindsay Liu, a 23-year-old student. They died on site. Crystal Campbell was taken to the athletic tent right after the finish line by a good friend of mine. She was still alive for a moment, and he was with her when we lost her. So these are the 3 folks we lost that day. For a lot of folks that don't know the Boston area, Watertown is, think of it as, if you know New York, it's like a borough. It's a suburb of Boston. It's just about 6 miles from downtown Boston area, although it takes like an hour to get there, but that's besides the point. It's a very small town. There are 32,000 residents in Watertown. And at the beginning, I told you I was from Boston. I grew up in Watertown. So the police officers that responded that night, I either went to high school with or have known my whole life. My uncle was a detective in the Watertown police force, and many of my friends are Watertown police officers to this day. Watertown is a small town, as I said, and they only have, the entire police force between officers and staff is 68 people. This was an overnight incident. There's 6 people at night. So how did we get to Watertown? Jeff Bauman was a young man who pretty much became the face of the Boston Marathon bombing. If you've seen the movie Patriots Day, he's the young man that lost both legs. When Jeff was on site and emergency services got to him, he told them he had seen the guy, he looked him in the face. At that point, Jeff was taken into surgery to save his life. When he woke up the next day, the FBI was waiting for him, and he was able to give a full account, including a description that enabled Boston police to sift through 10,000 pieces of media and find the Zarneff brothers. So about 10 o'clock at night, there's a report that Officer Sean Collier was shot at MIT, with a car hijacking happening right after that. At about 10:30, the owner of the Mercedes escapes and reports his car stolen at a gas station. At this point, nobody knows who's in that Mercedes. The Mercedes enters Watertown, which was a huge mistake, and Joe Reynolds, young officer, great guy, starts chasing the car, and he intercepts it on Laurel Street. Immediately after that, Sergeant John McClellan arrived a few minutes later, and as John's driving down the street, his windshield is shot out. Sergeant Jeff Pugliese comes down the side street. If you've seen the movie, Jeff is the guy that J.K. Simmons plays. Now, these guys are dedicated officers. Not a single one of them had ever fired their weapon until that night. And in 7 minutes, between the Zarneff brothers and Watertown police, 200 shots were fired. There were multiple pipe bombs. Zokar threw a pressure cooker. He had a 3rd pressure cooker bomb. But the particular street they were on is on a hill, so instead of shooting out, it shot the wrong way. The second vehicle enters Laurel Street, and this is where things get interesting, because Tamerlan had been shot several times in the chest. He's still advancing on officers, and his brother in the SUV literally runs him over and escapes. So now we're on the manhunt. By 10 a.m., my small hometown looked like a war zone. Police were doing door-to-door searches. It was absolutely crazy. At that point, Boston itself and the surrounding areas on a lockdown. All public transportation had been suspended. For cities outside Boston, it's a regional SWAT, so there'll be 2 or 3 towns together that make up the SWAT team. And actually, if you look at the bottom right-hand photo, the sniper who's so tall he's hanging off the roof. That is my stepbrother, Jeff. Here's some photos from that day. You can see where we're going door to door. We're trying to get folks either in or out of their homes. We want them all to be safe. This is a scene nobody in Watertown ever thought they'd see. By noon, 1,000 law enforcement had descended into my tiny little hometown, and they had come as far as New York City. My other brother, Mike, is a canine officer, and he's standing on the right-hand side of this photo. So when I tell you this incident is personal to me, there's no way. As a matter of fact, I had texted my brother, Mike, when they released the photos, and I said to him, you know this is going down in Watertown. Watertown is the highest, when I grew up, was the highest per capita area for Armenians living outside of Soviet Armenia. So it's an area that the Zokar brothers were very familiar with. And I texted my brother and I said, this is going down in Watertown. Oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And at midnight, he texted me back and said, I hate it when you're right. Game on. So this continued throughout the day. There's 2 malls in Watertown. This particular mall is the Old Mall, as we call it. There's a Target in there that they had been doing inventory. So this became police headquarters. As I said, you have 1,000 officers. If you blow up the photo, you'll see officers from all over the country: Connecticut, New Jersey, Maine, Maryland. Everybody went in. And Target became the supply for the Watertown Police Department. And what's amazing, when all was said and done and Watertown Police asked Target for a bill, Target said, don't worry about it. Across the street from this is the second mall, the Arsenal Mall, and that became media headquarters. Now, what's interesting is Ed DeVoe, the Watertown Police Chief, who I've known at the time, I've known him for years, he's in here with the police commissioner. He is in Ed Davis. He's in there with the mayor of Boston. Everybody's in there. And it was Ed DeVoe that maintained control of the situation when you got into command, because it was his time. At about 6 p.m., they decided to lift the lockdown in the city of Boston. There were so many reports of Zokar on a train heading south, swimming in Boston Harbor, all kinds of things. So they released the information. Dave Hannaberry and my dad have been voting together for years. Dave lives right near Laurel Street, and Dave is an avid smoker. So for the first time that day, Dave was able to go outside. And he noticed the flap on his boat was open, and he walked over to it and he noticed blood. So he went in and he called Ed DeVoe, another friend, and said, Ed, I think there's somebody in my boat. Well, those 1,000 police officers descended on Dave Hannaberry's boat, and his Boston whaler was pretty much shot up, and it was Zokar hiding in the boat. And it was incredible. If you saw any of the live footage that day of the police driving through Boston, it was amazing. So who are the Zarnev brothers? Tamerlan's 28, Zokar's 20. They're a Chechen family. They were moved after World War II their family had moved to Dagestan. Zokar came with his brothers and his parents and his sister in 2002. They came on a visiting visa and they requested asylum. Tamerlan stayed in Russia for another year. He was admitted to the US in 2003. He went to Cambridge Rindge and Latin High School, which was a local high school. He tried to get into college and had some trouble getting in, so he went to the Bunker Hill Community College. And in 2008, he became a devout Muslim. His dream was to compete on the US boxing team, but some police incidents, anger issues kept him from doing that. Zokar, as I said, came with his family. They were granted asylum in 2002. He became a naturalized citizen less than a year before this incident. He went to the same high school as his brother, and he was studying at UMass Dartmouth. Dzhokhar actually, when he thought he was going to die in that boat, he left a note that took responsibility for the Boston Marathon bombing, saying it was retribution for US military attacks. And for him, it was a religious ideology. He was getting revenge for his religion being attacked. So what is lone wolf terrorism? So really, truly, there's 4 factors that need to be met for it to be considered lone wolf terrorism. The first thing is it has to be an attack against others. It has to be beyond your personal motivation. You have to influence. You're looking to influence government or people trying to create that movement. And lone wolf terrorists are not affiliated with a terrorist organization. Forgive my spelling. One thing that's important, if you have even 2 or 3, a small group, they can still be considered lone wolf as long as they're not part of this terrorist organization. So the information I'm going to share with you today is a basic profile delivered by the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. They looked at 240 cases of lone wolf terrorism that happened in the United States starting in 1972. Let that sink in for a moment. 240 cases of lone wolf terrorism since 1972. They looked at behaviors, they looked for similarities, they tried to develop an offender profile. So here comes our first poll. If you click on the participants list and you open that up, you'll see at the bottom there's some different buttons. So just out of curiosity, who thinks the average lone wolf terrorist is under the age of 25? Click yes. So we got some folks clicking yes? Good. Who thinks they're in the age range of 25 to 29? All right, some other folks feel we're in there. Okay, a lot more there. What about 30 to 39? Okay, a lot more there. And what about 40 to 49? All right. Anybody think we have terrorists over the age of 50? Somebody did their homework. Let's look at this. So this is the profile. The offenders, as you can see, the majority of them fall between the ages of 30 and 44. And yes, the youngest has been 17 and the oldest has been 80 years old. So let's take another look. Let's look at race or ethnicity. Who believes our terrorists are white? Click yes. Okay, what about Middle Eastern? I hear you all clicking. Awesome. What about Black or African American? A few. What about biracial? God, my spelling is atrocious. Asian. Okay, Hispanic. All right, so let's see what our answers are. As you can see, we have the majority of our offenders have been white. Overwhelmingly white. Lone wolf offenders in the United States are white males between the ages of 30 and 40 predominantly. So let's look at the relationship status, another big factor. The majority of them have been single or divorced or separated. We have a few that have been married, fall into other categories. A lot of them have some college, high school or less. Few of them have been anything more than a bachelor's degree. Religious affiliation, instead of doing a poll, I'm just going to give you the answer. 50% have been Christian, 35% Muslim, Jewish 4%, 12% said other religion. What's interesting is when you look at how they identify, less than 20% of those that were Christian or Muslim were actively practicing their religion. Military service, quite a few of them had served in the military, been deployed to a combat zone. Another factor that the FBI found interesting is 10% of them have been rejected from service. So we have a question from Kelly. What if they have pledged allegiance to a terrorist group? Is this still an act of lone wolf terrorism? By FBI definition, it would not be, because they would be an affiliate. So let's look at prior criminal behavior. Quite a few of them had not been arrested, 30%, but 70% had been arrested at least once. So we start seeing a pattern emerge. We have white males, they tend to be less educated, and they already have criminal records. You have a lot of them that are having mental health and substance abuse. So I actually had one student a couple semesters ago look at the role of mental health issues in terrorism. And what we're finding is 25% of them have been formally diagnosed. The 3 leading diagnoses were depression, bipolar, and schizophrenia. 6 of the offenders they had researched, and they focused on 52 offenders, had more than one issue. But what's interesting is, in addition to those 25, 35% have been, their family and friends suspected something was going on. 40% of them had expressed a suicidal ideation, and 33% ultimately died in their attack. 65% no known history of suicidal issues, 50% on drugs. So the question is, lone wolf terrorists are truly isolated, even if they share some ideological connections with other terrorist groups. And that is what the FBI has found in their studies. So if you look at the Zarnoff brothers, their ideological issue that they tied it to was the death of Muslims. Yet they were not affiliated or pledged allegiance to any other terrorist group. They acted on their own. A lot of their issues stemmed from, they believed that the United States was this land of opportunity, but they were stuck middle to lower income. The area they were in, it's very urban, so there was a lot of challenges, a lot of poverty, and there was a lot of issues with that. Carolyn, believe it or not, there have been no women out of those 240 cases that the FBI looked at. None of them were women. In my personal opinion, I think it's a matter of time. Mm. Now, you see women a lot being used by terrorist organizations. ISIS used women a lot, Al-Qaeda used them a lot, but you don't see them becoming lone wolf terrorists. So let's talk about radicalization. And because radicalization isn't just religion. It's when you go from a nonviolent belief system to violence. Now you start advocating, facilitating, or using violence, and you're trying to affect societal or political change. So that is why Stephen Paddock was considered to be radicalized. He became radicalized about gun control. He was very anti-government. So another question from Dr. Jordan, could just as easily be issue even driven as ideological? Okay, Kelly, you need to re-ask that question because I'm a little confused. Marge, most of them grew up with father figures. I can pull the FBI report if you send me an email, and I can look at that. They really didn't study the family as much, but a lot of them did have father figures. Many of them were absent. So again, Stephen Paddock's father, wanted by the FBI for about 4 or 5 years. He was on the FBI most wanted list for bank robbery. The Zarnoff brothers, their father was very active. At one point, he left the country and was out of the country with the mother when this happened. She was wanted for check kiting. She was writing checks without having money in the bank. So they were out of the country, and it was difficult for them to get back into the States when Dzhokhar was arrested. So ideologies, you know, it's interesting when you look at ideologies, what people believe is what's motivating terrorists. So let's go back to our participant list, and let's go back and use that checkbox. Who believes the biggest ideology is Islamist extremism? Okay, we've got a couple there. What about anti-government? Okay, lots of folks changing their votes on that one. Lots of anti-government. What about racial motivation? Okay, we got a few. Pro-life extremism. If you're as old as I am, you will remember the huge issues where abortion clinics were being bombed. What about white superiority? Yeah, we got a few there. And anti-racism? All right, so let's see. Primary ideology for lone wolf terrorists in the United States, they are against the government, or it is racially motivated. There's only about 19% that are radical Islamist, but the majority of them, 48%, it ties to race and government. The other violent extremism is just about anything under the umbrella. It could be just about everything. So Dr. Jordan's revised this question. Lone wolf terrorists can draw their motivation just as often from issue events as they can from ideology? Absolutely. Lone wolf terrorists are becoming radicalized on their own, and they're becoming radicalized based on what you're seeing here. So if you take the guy who flew the plane into the IRS building, for him, it was about how he was treated as a federal employee. So and he felt that employees weren't being treated right, and the IRS was against him. So it's really, at least in this country, it's a little bit different than what you're seeing outside of the United States. So what's interesting, and I found this Venn diagram to be super interesting, is the overlap. When you see where government, religion, and race intersect, is a huge, huge ideological bed of where these terrorists are coming from. So what are they doing in this country? In this country, they're not attacking people, they're attacking institutions. 17% of them attacked at federal government facilities. The rest of them, they were trying to attack law enforcement, religious centers, medical facilities. These are the institutions that make up our country. It's what we rely on as a country. It's our civilization. So when we say they're attacking our way of life, it's not necessarily about the people or the number of people. It's about the institution. So let's look at the Zarnoff brothers. In reality, they killed 3 people, injured about 200 others. But that was the oldest running marathon in the United States of America. It is a huge part of Massachusetts. And the Zarnoff brothers were not happy with Massachusetts. It's one of the most beloved events in that state, and they attacked them. So they're looking for that kind of impact. What are the stressors? Well, if you look at it, 48% of them had financial issues, 44% family. I mean, it's really high when you look at these numbers. So the stressors are coming from all different places. Jen, I don't have the childhood trauma numbers with me. The FBI, I'm really embarrassed by my spelling, I'm sorry. The FBI did not really go into depth on family because they did not have access to medical records as part of this study. I can tell you that the theses that I've seen from my students, childhood trauma really wasn't as big of an issue. Mental health wasn't as big of an issue as was their anti-government feelings, what happened to them later in life. Behavior. What did people notice about these folks? Now, this is one of those things that they say hindsight is 20/20, and we could all say, oh yeah, he was weird, he did this. Well, what their families observed was they had issues with interpersonal interactions. Zokar was not doing well at school. He was not hanging out with his friends. He became very quiet. Paddock stopped hanging out with family. He pretty much, his girlfriend, she was on her own. They all exhibited signs of anger or aggression, horrible mood swings. A lot of it tied to work and performance. So let's go to questions. One of the questions is, so in some ways, anti-government ideology could seg into the conspiracy theories, rise of disinformation of social media. You know what? Absolutely. I think right now, and I will start with the opinions of Cheryl Seminara, do not necessarily reflect those of American Public University or my previous employers. Absolutely, yes. The disinformation and misinformation that is happening today on social media is inciting a new generation of potential lone wolf offenders. And it's on all sides. Considering the push, pull, and personal radicalization process, is there a difference between the radicalization process between a lone wolf and a terrorist belonging to an organization? So, Oscar, if you really think about the organizations, there's a lot of indoctrination. The organizations tend to go out and find those young people that feel disassociated or feel like they have nothing. Whereas those lone wolves, that personal factor you mentioned, yeah, it's something that they feel. It's something that they feel they were slighted or they're passionate about. So, yeah, so Kelly's got some good summaries happening here, what we're seeing. So here's the shocking part. 17% of the offenders studied by the FBI were stopped, detained, or examined by law enforcement. 8% of them were done on the day of their attack. These, even though there's a lot of planning behind these events, they still tend to be more spontaneous. You don't see a lot of rhetoric leading up to it. They're using common weapons. 67% of them used firearms. 27% used easily accessible explosives. That's scary to me, folks. And again, if you haven't seen the movie Traitor, watch it. So what's happening today in our country? Without getting political, our country is at a tipping point like we have never seen before. Doesn't matter what side you fall on, our country is divided almost right down the middle. You're seeing, I have to tell you, I told you that both of my brothers were police officers. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. We have more people unemployed today, and folks, if we do not get COVID under control, it's only going to get worse. We have so many Americans on food lines that for the first time, international organizations are not going. They feel that the country most in need of their support is the United States of America. The country that has been the most powerful country through World War I and World War II is now the country most in need of international support. Folks, I don't care what side of the aisle you fall on. That's pretty shocking. So we have a, let's say, recognize it for grievance, something out of, yeah, you know, Chris, your comment about the IRT conspiracy theory, the whole, it's recognized as an avenue for grievances. Yes, there's so many avenues for grievances. You know, our country has not solved our racial issues. Again, my opinion. We've come a long way, but we're not there. I have many, many friends that I can't imagine what it's like when they work late and drive home alone in their cars. I have friends that are actors on TV shows that have been pulled over driving to set at 4 o'clock in the morning because they were driving while black. I have police officers in my family that fear for their lives when they go to work because they don't know what's going to happen. It's a tipping point for our country. So what does it all mean? Well, basically, it's really hard to profile a lone wolf terrorist. We all see the signs, but hindsight is 20/20. Today's global community, the internet, the availability of communications, the number of methods of communication, they can access information and spread information. The Tsarnaev brothers never had a video. Haddock never had a video. There were no manifestos like the Unabomber. Sometimes they have them, sometimes they don't. But it's a whole new game today. And the divide in our country is a breeding ground. And it's up to us as folks studying Homeland Security, national security, emergency management, that we need to set the tone. We need to be the folks that are the voice of reason, and we need to understand these lone wolf terrorists as best we can. Because here's my theory, folks. The behavioral analysis unit says it's hard to profile them. If they can't do it, I don't know who can. So I want to open it up to questions, get your thoughts. What are you thinking? Is there anything new or shocking that you heard tonight? Before we go to questions, here's my contact information. I do teach in the undergraduate and graduate program. I teach research methodology. So I believe there's a couple of my students that have signed in tonight. So looking forward to seeing you. That's also my personal email. So I want to turn it over to Q&A. What do you think? What scares you? What keeps you up at night? Folks, I believe your mics are open, so you can talk or you can type.
So we can just, I raised my hand.
Go ahead.
So you said that the lone wolf terrorists are not necessarily affiliated with any terrorist group. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the Tsarnaev brothers, Boston bombers, according to the FBI, had propaganda on their computers, something about Inspire magazine or something of the sort. And Timothy McVeigh, I believe, was motivated from the Waco and Ruby Ridge incidents, but also was motivated from some kind of propaganda, the Turner Diaries, I believe.
Right. So yes, that is part of their motivation, but the Tsarnaev brothers do not affiliate. So yes, they see the propaganda, they see the videos, they feel it, they relate to it, it touches them, but they don't join those groups. They don't act in their name. Whereas the individual that was caught in New York Times trying to set off a bomb in New York City, he had been trained by Al-Qaeda.
Okay, so they were motivated by the propaganda, but they weren't connected to them.
Correct. They didn't pledge their allegiance to them. So we got a question in chat. Stats suggest that government dissatisfaction is perhaps the most driving factor that motivates lone wolf terrorists. Any good ways to address this? Dr. Jordan, I have lots of good ways. You know, I think that our country is built with rights that no other country has. I believe that citizens have the right to arm themselves. I don't believe an average citizen who is not in law enforcement needs an automatic weapon. That's just my opinion. Do we need to change gun control? I don't know. Do we need to take care of the fringe, and we need to get better. You know, my biggest issue is the media. I tell my students that if you want to see pick any story in the news tonight, any story, and then go watch CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. You would think they are three different reports. So let's pick on this election, right? It's a hot topic. And the election was rigged. There was problem with the Dominion voting machine. So if you watch CNN, they're focusing on the states and what they're doing to certify the election. If you look at MSNBC, similar to CNN. If you look at Fox News, they're showing you reports of issues with Dominion machines from 2016 and 2017. So yes, there were issues with Dominion machines in 2016 and 2017. It's the media, they have two purposes, and I worked in media, and I can tell you, the media's job is not to report the news. The media's job is to sensationalize the news in a way that their viewers, readers, or listeners respond and sell advertising. That's it. So if you want to get the whole story, I challenge you. Pick one news item and watch it on 3 different stations. So we got another question. I believe the BAU's report examined the frequency of which family members reported seeing or feeling something was off. Chris, I do not know, but what I can do is if anybody wants to see the full report, email me at either of those email addresses and I will send it out to you. Next question. Am I surprised that racial attacks committed by whites are not happening on a scale during today's climate? Yes, I am surprised. I fear for my nieces and nephews that are 14 years to 7 years old. They're growing up in America I did not know. I grew up in Boston in the 60s and 70s, and it wasn't a black or white issue. It was the Italians lived in one neighborhood, the Irish in another. I didn't understand what it meant to be white or black or Spanish until I moved in 1993. Saw a little of it in college, but it was international. It was apartheid. It wasn't local. It didn't strike me. What's happening today, where you have militias trying to kidnap governors, we need to support the good police officers. We need to educate folks, and we need to start eliminating the fear that race brings. Question from Jen, what do I feel is going to be the progression of lone wolf terrorism, my forecast for the future? I'm not by the pool, there's no cocktails right now, but if we don't do something drastic, I believe possibly in my lifetime, we will see a second civil war in our country. It won't be of the magnitude. It will be based on haves and have-nots. It'll be based on ideology. And I hope to hell I'm wrong. So next question, I've recently sat in on a panel with highly respected women of the intel community, including Mary Legere. Mary is fabulous. Misinformation was listed by this panel as a top security threat to the US because of the average American's inability to discern fact from fiction. They brought up the possibility of legislation being passed in the future to hold media to standards of truth. Do I have an opinion of legislation of this sort? So our First Amendment right to free speech absolutely, positively must be protected. It's what makes us different than everybody else. I like what Twitter and Facebook have been doing, marking things. The problem is the average American does not understand what our Constitution does. Our average American doesn't, they follow the news they want to follow, right? So the people following Fox News have a very different mindset than people following CNN. And they're only gonna believe what we have. You know, it's a far cry from when I grew up, where we had 3 TV stations, and if you lived in a big city like I did, you had 2 UHF stations. We now have a 24/7 news cycle, and people's reactions, and you know, I believe we need to set guidelines. I don't know if legislation is the answer. Next question. My presentation suggests that a lack of voice, feelings of disenfranchisement, and the presence of compelling need to act form the basis of the conditions that make someone susceptible to becoming radicalized. Does the FBI or any other government agency have programs in place to address one or more of these underlying conditions? Absolutely, yes. I can tell you that I know that DHS and FBI do have programs. A lot of folks are looking, if you're familiar with criminal profiling is usually used deductively. The crime is committed and you profile using victimology, and you profile the offender, and you use that profile to narrow down your suspect pool. Well, there's also an inductive approach that's being used more and more. And you take this information from this report from the FBI and there are countless other interviews from the BAU. And when you see youthful and first-time offenders, and you're seeing some of the characteristics and factors present that you see in these trends, you're able to react differently. Now, with that being said, the situation we're in today with high unemployment, with food lines like I have never, I mean, my God, we have military families on food lines. You know, we have families that the only way the family is eating is they go to the school in the morning and pick up the kids' meals, and the family is rationing that meal. Folks, this is the United States of America. That shouldn't be happening, my opinion. So yes, they're looking at ways like that. And if you think about those arrests when they were arrested the first time, if there was a greater intervention at that time, could we have stopped it? Could we have stopped Timothy McVeigh? Probably not. Could we have stopped Zokar from joining his brother? Could be. So Kelly, if you want to learn more about inductive profiling, I actually got my second master's from APUS, and I will send you my thesis. It took an inductive profiling approach to compare 2 people, one who chose a life of public service and one who took a bunch of people to Guyana, where they drank Kool-Aid, and it's called The Fine Line Between Jim Jones and Colin Powell. Should be in the APUS library, but I'm happy to send it to anybody who wants to read it. And it really looks at, if we took that inductive approach, could we have stopped somebody? So yes, I believe we can. The question is, does our police have resources? So I think a lot of things that we're doing right now, I am not saying we need to defund police. I'm saying we need to fund them differently. So as long as we have People in our streets, gangs, drug dealers with automatic weapons, our police need automatic weapons. We need to better prepare our police officers. You know, I am happy offline to tell you stories my family has told me about what it's like when you walk in a room and you just don't know. I am happy to tell you the difference between good cops and bad cops. There's all kinds of things, but I think that inductive profiling can make a difference. Other questions? Feel free to talk if you want.
Here's one. We have easier access to guns in the United States. I would suggest greater gun control. One of the easiest ways to get around the background checks and purchasing firearms is through gun shows. Should there be some sort of process to monitor or pretty much suppress these shows from happening to make it that it's less likely for criminals or those that are interested in terrorism from obtaining such dangerous tools?
And is it, forgive me if I say your name wrong, is it Nabil?
It's Nabil.
Nabil, thank you. Nabil, you know what, I think one of the issues with the shows is how are these dealers getting licenses? How are we issuing licenses to somebody to be a gun dealer when they don't have a storefront? In my opinion, that's part of the issue. And because we're giving these to folks that aren't as what I would consider legitimate, then how do we know who they're selling guns to? You know, you could, I hate to stereotype, but if you look at any TV show, I mean, let's face it, we could control the gun dealers, we could control the gun shows. I guarantee you, I could walk into any city and probably within half an hour figure out where I could go to buy a gun.
I was thinking of it as a legal loophole for criminals in my thought process, but okay, I'll consider that.
Yeah, you know, the other thing too is nobody needs a gun that quickly, right? So I'm all for a 3-day wait, but we need a national registry. States issue licenses, and there isn't a lot of communication state to state. Now, there's reciprocity for some states, but you know, I think of myself here in the Virginia area, you know, easily I could go into Maryland or DC and try to purchase a weapon. And it varies state to state. Florida, it's a lot more prevalent. So I think there needs to be, I don't think there's an issue with, and again, just my opinion, some form of national registry, but we have to tie in the ability to look for medical records. So when you apply for that gun license, there needs to be a box that you check that you can look up my medical records. There needs a box to check that you can look up my criminal records nationwide. And I think that's the problem we're seeing is it's not happening like it should. Nobody needs a gun in one day. If you can't wait 3 days for a gun, that's a signal something's going on. Whether it's a lone wolf terrorist or you're pissed off at your spouse because you caught your spouse with someone else. So I'm all for updating legislation. I'm all for better control of who's a dealer and how they sell.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Well, if there's no other questions, I want to thank you all so much for attending. Hopefully, if you're not one of my students, you will be someday. I teach HLSS 300, 500. I teach the undergraduate capstone, and I teach the graduate capstone. So thank you to everybody from the group. Thank you, Kelly, for your leadership. Thanks again for your patience last week. I promise when I am up and running, I will send photos to everybody. Right now, I'm sitting on the couch with ice on my knee. That's it for me, everyone.